To the doctor, I was just a wide-eyed kid with a dust rag. A naive suburban boy staring at the stars, easily molded, easily fooled, and desperate for a father figure. He saw a blank slate he could scribble his twisted genius upon without question. He didn't just lie to me, he violated my mind. He smiled like a grandfather while hiding blueprints for human experimentation beneath my workbench. He fed me cookies with hands that had signed death warrants for thousands. He took my childhood sanctuary and turned it into a waiting room for the Fourth Reich. But he made a fatal calculation. He thought he was training a blind follower who would look the other way. He didn't realize that by teaching me to see the details, he was handing me the weapon to dismantle him. The wide-eyed boy didn't walk out of that shed. He taught me how to build monsters. Now he has to survive the one he created. The air in Willow Creek hung heavy, a wet blanket of humidity that pressed down on the corrugated tin roofs and shimmered above the sun-baked asphalt. It was the kind of Alabama summer where the cicadas chirped a relentless symphony, and the promise of a thunderstorm lingered, thick and muggy, just out of reach. 10-year-old Leo Maxwell, however, felt none of the usual languor. His freckled face was flushed, not from the heat, but from the thrill of anticipation. Today he was an apprentice to a titan, a co-conspirator in the grandest of scientific endeavors. His mentor, Dr. Klaus Richter, was, in Leo's estimation, the smartest, kindest man in the whole of Willow Creek. While other neighbors pruned roses or gossiped over iced tea, Dr. Richter, a man whose German accent made every pronouncement sound like a profound secret, was building rockets. Not just any rockets, but intricate, gleaming marvels that soared higher than the old water tower, leaving streaks of wonder against the cobalt sky before parachuting gracefully back to Earth. Dr. Richter, with his spectacles perched low on his nose and his perpetually flour-dusted hands. He also baked an exceptional strudel, embodied the future. He was everything Leo aspired to be, brilliant, inventive, and utterly fascinating. Today's mission, however, was less glamorous. Leo, my young colleague, Dr. Richter had declared earlier that morning, a playful twinkle in his cerulean eyes. Even the greatest minds need order. My laboratory, alas, has become a wilderness, a jungle of invention. The laboratory was, in fact, a ramshackle wooden shed at the back of Dr. Richter's sprawling, slightly overgrown property. It leaned precariously, its paint peeling like sunburnt skin, but to Leo, it was a sanctuary of marvels. Inside, the scent of sawdust, old oil, and something vaguely metallic hung thick. Shelves sagged under the weight of gears, wires, half-finished prototypes, and a dizzying array of tools Leo couldn't even name. Light struggled to penetrate the grime-streaked window panes, casting long, dancing shadows that made every corner seem to hold a secret. Leo, armed with a dust rag and an eagerness that bordered on reverence, tackled a workbench buried beneath layers of detritus. He whistled tunelessly as he polished a brass gyroscope, its smooth surface catching the weak light. He hummed while untangling a spool of copper wire that had somehow become one with a handful of mismatched nuts and bolts. Each object held a story, a potential for flight or discovery, and Leo imagined Dr. Richter, late at night, hunched over these very items, conjuring miracles. His fingers, still small and nimble, grazed against a loose wooden panel at the back of a particularly deep, cluttered shelf. It wasn't quite flush with its neighbors, a sliver of darkness visible behind it. Curiosity, a powerful current in Leo's young heart, tugged at him. He pressed against the panel. It gave way with a faint click, sliding inward to reveal a narrow, dust-choked cavity. Leo's breath hitched. This wasn't just clutter. This was hidden. He reached in, his fingers exploring the cool, rough wood. His fingertips brushed against the slick surface of a rolled-up canvas, then a stack of what felt like brittle papers. He pulled them out carefully, blinking in the dim light. The canvas unrolled into what appeared to be blueprints, meticulously drawn, filled with complex diagrams and annotations in a language Leo didn't recognize, but whose sharp, angular script seemed vaguely familiar from Dr. Richter's occasional scribblings. German. Below the blueprints were journals, thick leather-bound volumes, their pages filled with the same precise, elegant script. They smelled of age and dried ink. But it was the last item, tucked beneath the journals, that caught the true breath from his lungs. A photograph, faded, its edges softened by time, but undeniably clear. It showed Dr. Richter, unmistakably, though younger, his hair darker, his jawline sharper, the same piercing blue eyes glinting even in the monochrome print. He stood ramrod straight, a crisp, unfamiliar uniform clinging to his frame. Beside him, even taller, bulkier, was another man. His face stern and unsmiling, his own uniform emblazoned with heavy insignia. Leo's gaze dropped. Dr. Richter's arm, draped casually around the shoulders of the stern man, bore a stark, disturbing symbol. A black swastika stark against a red armband. The genial smile Leo knew so well, the kind, crinkling lines around his eyes, seemed grotesquely out of place on the younger Richter's face, juxtaposed against the grim military attire and that hateful emblem. A chill, far colder than the Alabama heat, snaked its way up Leo's spine. He didn't understand. He couldn't understand. Dr. Richter was good. He was kind. He built rockets. He baked strudel. That symbol. Leo had seen it in newsreels, in history books. It belonged to the bad men, the monsters, the enemy his father had fought against in the war. Couldn't belong to Dr. Richter. Simply couldn't. His small hands began to tremble, the photograph crinkling slightly in his sweaty grip. He stared at the younger, unfamiliar face of his idol, searching for any trace of the gentle old man he knew. There was none. Only a stranger, standing proud beside a man whose uniform screamed authority and menace. A floorboard creaked behind him. Leo froze, the sound echoing unnaturally loud in the suddenly silent shed. He didn't need to turn around. He could feel the sudden drop in temperature, the prickling sensation on the back of his neck. Leo, Dr. Richter's voice, usually a warm rumble, was flat, devoid of its usual melodic cadence. Leo slowly turned, the faded photograph still clutched in his hand, its shocking image facing outward. Dr. Richter stood framed in the doorway, blocking the last sliver of sunlight. His spectacles were gone, his eyes unshielded, and they weren't twinkling. They were fixed not on Leo but on the photograph. A flicker of something cold, something utterly unreadable, passed through those normally kind blue eyes. A shadow fell across his face, deeper and more profound than any the dim shed could cast. The genial rocket man was gone, replaced by an unknown, silent figure. The air grew thick, suffocating. Leo's chest felt tight, a silent scream building in his throat. Dr. Richter took a slow, deliberate step forward, his gaze never leaving the image of his past. The silence stretched, taut and dangerous, as heavy as the impending thunderstorm. Leo's breath hitched again, but this time, it was a gasp of raw, unadulterated fear. The silence stretched, not just in the shed, but inside Leo's very bones. Dr. Richter's eyes, unshielded by his usual spectacles, were no longer kind. They were an Arctic blue, frozen on the faded photograph clutched in Leo's trembling hand. The man in the picture, young and stern, stood beside a uniformed figure of undeniable menace, a shadow of an unremembered past that had just violently intruded on Leo's present. Dr. Richter took another slow, deliberate step, the floorboards groaning beneath his weight. His gaze, fixed on the image, was unnerving in its intensity, stripping Leo of his breath. "Where did you find this, Leo?" The question was a low growl, devoid of the familiar warmth, each syllable clipped and sharp. Leo's throat felt like sandpaper. He tried to speak, but only a dry rasp escaped. He lifted a shaking finger towards the loose brick in the workbench. It was hidden. Richter's eyes, momentarily leaving the photograph, darted to the workbench, then back to Leo, a flicker of something unreadable, fear, anger, in their depths. He reached out, his large hands surprisingly swift, and gently, yet with an undeniable sense of command, took the photograph from Leo. "This is an old family photo, Leo," he said, his voice regaining a semblance of its usual cadence, though it was still tighter, less resonant. He turned the picture over, inspecting the sepia-toned paper as if searching for something. "A distant relative, from long ago, before I came here." He offered a strained smile, a pale imitation of his usual twinkling amusement. "A different life, my boy, one best left in the past." But the smile didn't reach his eyes. They remained cold, distant. He folded the photograph carefully, almost ritualistically, and slipped it into the breast pocket of his denim work shirt. Perhaps, he added, his voice regaining a touch of its familiar authority, you should not concern yourself with such old things, Leo. They can be misleading, confusing. The past is a tricky business. He clapped Leo on the shoulder, a gesture that usually conveyed comfort and camaraderie, but now felt heavy, almost a warning. Come, let us clear this shed. Your parents will be wondering where you are. And we have rockets to build, eh? The words were meant to reassure, to bring things back to normal, but they only solidified the chill in Leo's gut. The Rocket Man was back, but the old, cheerful innocence was gone, replaced by a veneer stretched taut over a chilling secret. That night, the house felt different, charged with an invisible tension that hummed beneath the floorboards. Leo, excused from the adults' dinner party, lay in bed, feigning sleep, but his ears were tuned to the murmur of voices drifting up from the living room. His parents, usually so open and cheerful, were talking in hushed tones with the Millers, their closest friends, about Dr. Richter. Extraordinary what they're doing. Mrs. Miller's voice, usually a bright chirp, was subdued, bringing all these brilliant minds over after the war. Our war. There was an unspoken emphasis on our that seemed to dismiss other experiences. Leo held his breath, pressing his ear closer to the floor vent. It's a necessary evil, I suppose. His father, usually so boisterous, said quietly. We need their expertise. Can't let the Russians get ahead, can we? These scientists, they're valuable assets. But some of the stories, Mrs. Miller's voice trailed off. Hearsay, Leo's mother interjected, her tone firm, a note of finality that Leo rarely heard. Old gossip. We needed them, period. Operation Paperclip, they call it. And Dr. Richter is a kind, brilliant man, an asset to our community. Look what he's done for Leo. A pause, then Mr. Miller's rumbling voice, lower than the others. Still, some of the things you hear about what they were involved in back there, it makes your skin crawl. You wonder how much one can truly change. Enough, John. Leo's father cut in, a new edge in his voice. We don't know the full story, and it's not our place to judge. They're here now. They're Americans. They're helping us win the future. The conversation shifted abruptly to mundane town gossip, but the words lingered in the air, heavy and disturbing. Newcomers, Europe, special programs, scientists, necessary evil, what they were involved in, how much one can truly change. It wasn't just Dr. Richter who had a hidden past. It seemed his presence here was part of a larger, unspoken truth his parents were unwilling to confront. The next few days, Leo couldn't shake the feeling of being in a dream, one where the familiar had turned subtly grotesque. He watched Dr. Richter, now with a hyper-awareness, seeing details he'd always dismissed or simply never noticed. He caught the glint in Richter's eye as a military C-130 rumbled low overhead, heading towards the nearby airbase. Not the casual glance of an observer, but a rigid focus, a sudden tightening of the jaw, a posture of alert tension that quickly vanished as the aircraft passed. It was as if a switch had been flipped, revealing a momentary glimpse of something coiled and ready beneath the genial exterior. Another afternoon, while struggling with a particularly stubborn component on a miniature launch platform, Richter's usual patience snapped. No, Leo, nicht so, he barked, his voice sharp and unfamiliar, the German words slicing through the air like a whip. Like this. He snatched the component, his movements precise, almost violent, then immediately softened, offering a sheepish smile. My apologies, Leo. An old habit. From another life, you understand. But Leo understood only that the mask had slipped, revealing a demanding, authoritarian presence. What truly unnerved him was during their planning sessions. Dr. Richter had unveiled a new, highly ambitious rocket design. It was sleeker, faster, more complex than anything they'd attempted, its nose cone tipped with a peculiar, flattened cone. For optimal payload delivery, Richter explained, his eyes alight with intellectual fervor. The precise application of force, Leo, is paramount. Every variable accounted for. Every angle, every joule of energy, every impact. He spoke of trajectories and velocities with an almost clinical detachment, his language peppered with chillingly practical terms about terminal velocity and target acquisition. His usual gentle enthusiasm was replaced by a cold, calculating brilliance. He wasn't just talking about a hobby rocket anymore. He was discussing a weapon, albeit a miniature one. He drew diagrams of theoretical impact zones, not with the wonder of a boy designing a toy, but with the grim satisfaction of an engineer perfecting a destructive instrument. Leo saw it then. The meticulousness, the obsession with efficiency, the detachment from the consequences of the precise application of force. It wasn't just a passion for rockets. It was a deeply ingrained philosophy, and it mirrored the cold logic his father had used, speaking of necessary evils and valuable assets. Dr. Richter, perhaps sensing Leo's growing distance, his sudden quietude, pushed him harder into the new design. "This is beyond anything we've done, Leo," he said, handing him a sheaf of complex equations. "A true test of your abilities. You must master these calculations. Every single variable is critical. The slightest error and the entire mission fails." He leaned over Leo's shoulder, his breath warm against Leo's ear, guiding his hand through the intricate mathematical labyrinth. It felt less like a mentorship and more like an examination, a rigorous trial. Was he being tested? For what? The equations swirled before Leo's eyes, a dizzying dance of numbers that promised either unprecedented power or catastrophic destruction. He looked at the blueprint of the rocket, its sleek, ominous form, and then at the benevolent, yet increasingly alien face of Dr. Richter. A question screamed silently in his mind. What kind of force are you truly trying to apply, Dr. Richter? And what will happen if I make a mistake? His pencil hovered over a crucial determinant, a calculation for the dispersal pattern of the payload. His mind raced, not with numbers, but with images. The uniformed man in the photo, the hushed whispers of his parents, and the chilling glint in Richter's Arctic eyes. He was being taught to build a weapon, and the price of failure felt like more than just a ruined rocket. It felt like a betrayal, a potential catastrophe waiting to unfold. The line between mentor and manipulator had blurred, leaving Leo lost in a terrifying new reality. The chill in the air, a whisper of autumn's arrival, did little to cool the fire still raging beneath Leo's skin. Dr. Richter's equations, once a thrilling challenge, now felt like shackles, each variable a link in a chain he hadn't known was binding him. The blueprint for the rocket, so elegant in its destructive potential, flashed behind his eyes. He'd left Richter's study with a headache that throbbed in time with his racing pulse, a drumbeat of unease. He needed space, air that hadn't been breathed by the heavy, sweet scent of Richter's pipe tobacco. He wandered to the edge of the doctor's property, a boundary marked by a gnarled oak, its leaves just beginning to brown. From here, the dense woods sloped down into a clearing, a quiet spot where he sometimes imagined himself an intrepid explorer, charting unknown territories. Today, however, his gaze was drawn not to the familiar, but to the foreign. Below, nestled discreetly behind a thicket of pines, sat the sleek, black sedan. It was the same car he'd seen before, an anomaly in Willow Creek's parade of dusty pickups and sedate family vehicles. And as always, two figures occupied its front seats. Leo shielded his eyes against the late afternoon sun, though the glint off the car's polished chrome was all too visible. He knew they weren't from Willow Creek. Their clothes, their quiet intensity, even the way they held themselves, they were different. Europeans, he'd heard his parents whisper about such people touched by the war. Curiosity, a potent force that often superseded caution in Leo's young mind, tugged him closer. He descended the gentle slope, his scuffed shoes crunching on fallen leaves, each step bringing him nearer to the enigma. The couple seemed to be staring at Richter's house, their heads barely visible above the dashboard. He'd seen them with binoculars before, tiny silver cylinders that flashed in the sunlight. What were they looking for? And why did they choose such a peculiar vantage point? As he drew nearer, Miriam startlingly looked up. Her head snapped toward him, a flicker of something sharp and assessing in her dark eyes before it was quickly masked. Ben, beside her, remained unmoving, a statue of stoic vigilance, though Leo could feel his gaze, cool and unblinking, shift to him. Leo stopped a respectful distance from the car, hands tucked into his pockets. "Hello," he offered, his voice a little too loud in the quiet clearing. "Are you lost?" Miriam forced a small, strained smile. It didn't quite reach her eyes. "No, young man, not lost, just observing the local flora." Her voice, though polite, carried an underlying tension, like a tightly wound spring. She gestured vaguely at the trees around them. Leo frowned. Flora? She sounded like a textbook. But you're looking at Dr. Richter's house, he stated, pointing. And I've seen you with binoculars. He saw Ben's jaw tighten almost imperceptibly. Are you looking for something inside? Miriam's smile faltered completely. Her gaze swept the surrounding woods, then settled back on Leo, an unnerving intensity returning to her eyes. We are academics, she said, her voice dropping a fraction. Researching post-war societal integration. Dr. Richter is merely part of our wider scope of interest in the community. Post-war societal integration. The words were long, unwieldy, and meaningless to Leo. He just wanted to know about Europe, about the whispers, about the war that had shaped his parents' silent fears. Are you from Europe? He pressed, stepping a little closer. Did you see the war? Miriam's breath hitched. A tremor ran through her, subtle, but undeniable. Her eyes, suddenly distant, seemed to stare through him, into a place far away and infinitely darker. A German boy, a child, with the same flaxen hair and earnest, inquiring eyes as Miriam's mind reeled. The faces of her cousins, their laughter echoing in a phantom past, children who had never lived to ask about the war, because the war had claimed them. The irony was a bitter ash on her tongue. To be here, hunting the very men who had forged that hell, and to be confronted by a child who, in any other circumstance, might have been one of them. It was a cruel twist of fate, a reminder of what had been stolen. The war, it was a long time ago, she managed, her voice thin. She glanced at Ben, a silent plea for assistance. Ben, ever the professional, subtly shifted his position, his hand inching closer to something unseen beneath the dashboard. He maintained his fixed stare on Richter's house, but his peripheral vision, Leo knew, was locked on him. My parents whisper about it, Leo continued, oblivious to the undercurrent of danger, his childhood innocence a shield and a vulnerability. They say it changed everything. Did it change you? The question hung in the crisp air, stark and accusatory, though Leo had meant it simply. Miriam flinched as if struck. The image of the train cars, packed tight with human cargo, of the barbed wire, of the smoke it flashed before her eyes, a searing, instantaneous wound. Her control, so meticulously maintained for years, threatened to shatter. She could feel the bile rising, the raw, unprocessed grief threatening to burst through the carefully constructed facade of the detached academic. It changes everyone, boy, she said, her voice laced with an unexpected, raw edge. She bit back the rest, the fury, the pain, the cold, calculated revenge that fueled her every waking moment. This child, standing here, so full of life and naive curiosity, was a dangerous distraction. He was too close to them, too close to Richter, too close to the truth that would inevitably explode in this sleepy town. He had to be deterred, for his own safety and for the mission. You should go home, young man, she said, her voice now firm, authoritative, yet still carrying that faint, sorrowful tremor. This is not a safe place for children to play. Not right now. The unspoken warning hung in the air, heavy and palpable. Leo's initial curiosity gave way to a prickle of unease. He wasn't playing. He was learning. He looked from Miriam's haunted eyes to Ben's unyielding stare. The gentle breeze rustling through the pines suddenly felt like a cold breath on his neck. He felt dismissed, but also warned. A genuine shiver ran down his spine, one that had nothing to do with the chill of autumn. He stood his ground for a moment longer, a silent challenge, then turned to go. As he ascended the slope, he glanced back. Miriam and Ben were looking at him now, not at Richter's house. Their faces were grim, their attention entirely focused on his retreating figure. Just as he reached the gnarled oak, a sudden, sharp rap sounded from the window of Dr. Richter's study. Leo froze. He hadn't heard anyone approach the window. He looked up, and there, framed by the leaded glass, was Dr. Richter. He was standing perfectly still, one hand resting on the pane, the other holding a half-smoked pipe. His gaze was fixed, not on Leo, but on the black sedan below. Richter's expression was unreadable, a blend of mild curiosity and something else, something cold and predatory. A faint, almost imperceptible smile played on his lips. He lifted his free hand, Not waving, but a slow, deliberate gesture, like a conductor acknowledging his orchestra. And then he tilted his head, ever so slightly, and winked. Not at Leo. At the black sedan. Leo felt a cold dread settle in his stomach. He looked back at Miriam and Ben, whose faces, he now saw, had gone bone white. Chapter 4. The Unmasking. Chapter 4. The Unmasking. The cold dread that had settled in Leo's stomach tightened into a knot of icy terror. Richter's wink. Not at him, but at the anonymous black sedan idling on the gravel drive. And Miriam and Ben, their faces leached of all color, staring at him, not the doctor. It was a silent, chilling tableau that screamed of complicity, of hidden pacts, of a truth far more sinister than Leo had dared to imagine. He didn't wait for an explanation. Miriam's earlier warning, Ben's cryptic resistance. They coalesced into a potent, bitter certainty. Whatever Richter was, he wasn't alone, and his secrets ran deeper than the grave. Leo turned and sprinted, not back to his house, but into the dense cover of the woods, crashing through brittle undergrowth until the towering pines swallowed him whole. He didn't stop until his lungs burned and the sharp tang of pine needles filled his nostrils, a desperate attempt to cleanse the memory of that predatory smile. Back in the relative sanctuary of his father's study, the air felt thick with unspoken history. The room, usually a comfort, now felt like a vault of unanswered questions. He dragged a dusty footstool to the highest shelf, his fingers brushing past forgotten trophies and faded photographs, until they snagged on a row of heavy military-issue hardcovers. These were his father's wartime references, relics of a past Leo had always felt disconnected from. Now they were a lifeline. He pulled down a thick volume titled Insignia and Uniforms of the Third Reich, its cover a faded olive drab. The pages, brittle with age, exhaled the musty scent of forgotten battles and distant nightmares. His heart hammered as he flipped through meticulously detailed illustrations of uniforms, rank badges, and, finally, armbands. He found it on page 117, nestled among a dozen other variations. The specific eagle and swastika design, rendered in stark black and white. It was unequivocal. The armband in the photograph, the one draped over Richter's youthful shoulder, was a Nazi insignia. A wave of nausea washed over him. The genial, quiet doctor who had offered him cookies, who had patiently explained the mysteries of combustion engines, who shared his profound love for classical music, he had warned that. The implications were an abyss. A cold, analytical part of Leo's mind demanded more. Confirmation. Evidence that couldn't be dismissed as a youthful indiscretion or a mere uniform. This was no ordinary man. This was a man with a past that reeked of unspeakable evil. The opportunity came 2 days later. He saw Richter's black Cadillac pull out of the driveway, the doctor himself behind the wheel, his silhouette outlined against the afternoon sun. Richter was alone, and he was gone for a long time. Leo waited until the car was a distant speck on the winding road, then slipped out of his house, a tremor running through him that had nothing to do with the crisp autumn air. The walk to Richter's house felt like a journey into enemy territory. Each step was a deliberate act of transgression. He expected alarms, cameras, a hidden guard dog, but the house stood silent, ancient, brooding. He tried the study door. Unlocked. A calculated oversight, or a trap. He swallowed hard, pushed the door open, and stepped inside. The study was a shrine to old-world elegance, filled with the scent of aged leather and pipe tobacco. Bookshelves groaned under the weight of scholarly tomes, their titles in Latin, German, and archaic English. Leo moved with surgical precision, his eyes scanning every surface, every shadow. His gaze landed on the heavy mahogany desk, rich with a dark patina. It was too grand, too solid, not to hold secrets. He ran his hand along the ornate carvings, then underneath, searching for any give, any seam. His fingers brushed against something. A slight indentation, a faint ridge. He pressed harder, and with a soft click, a narrow panel slid inward, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside, nestled on a bed of velvet, was a single leather-bound journal. It felt impossibly heavy in his hands, its cover embossed with a single, unadorned symbol he didn't recognize, a stylized, almost brutalist R. The pages inside were filled with dense, elegant script, written in a language Leo could not read, German. His heart sank, then surged with a desperate resolve. He remembered the town library's small foreign language section. An hour later, back in his own home, the journal lay open on his desk, flanked by a battered German-English dictionary he'd borrowed under the guise of an academic project. The task was agonizing. Word by painful word, he wrestled with the elegant script, piecing together fragments, context, meaning. He started with the easier words. Experiment.
Wissen. Ziel.
Experiment. Knowledge. Goal. Then came the chilling ones.
Untermensch.
Probanden. The subhuman. Subjects. His breath hitched. The words blurred before his eyes, but he forced himself to focus. The dictionary a bulwark against the rising tide of revulsion. He painstakingly translated passages, a mosaic of horror slowly forming in his mind. Our progress with the subhuman subjects has been illuminating. The tolerance thresholds for neurological manipulation are higher than anticipated, though fatalities remain an issue. More precise control over the stimuli is required for optimal data acquisition. The Führer's vision of technological superiority requires sacrifices. The Third Reich will dominate through science, through our relentless pursuit of the ultimate weapon. Project Paperclip ensures our advancements will be preserved, no matter the cost. Then, a name, scrawled repeatedly in the margins, underlined with a forceful hand, almost a signature. Klaus Richter. The air in the room grew thin, sharp, like glass. Leo felt as if he'd been punched in the gut. The wind knocked out of him. Klaus Richter. Not Karl Richter. Klaus. And Project Paperclip. The name of the American operation to recruit Nazi scientists after the war, a dark stain on history books. He translated another entry, this one more personal, more damning. The new facility at unintelligible, but a distinct concentration camp reference provides ample material for our research into rapid-acting neural agents. Dr. Mengel's methodologies, while crude, offer a foundation. My work focuses on refinement, on the subtle art of control rather than mere extermination. The fatherland will reap the benefits of this efficiency. The journal slipped from Leo's trembling fingers, clattering to the desk. He scrambled back from it as if burned, his chair scraping against the floorboards. The kind mentor, the gentle, soft-spoken neighbor, the man who nurtured rose gardens and loved Mozart, was Klaus Richter, a lead scientist in weapons development, directly implicated in human experimentation, at a concentration camp. The transformation was absolute, terrifying. The image of the man he thought he knew shattered into a million malevolent shards. The benevolent facade had peeled away, revealing not a man, but a monster. Leo stared at the journal, its elegant script now a grotesque testament to inhumanity. His hands were shaking violently. He felt a scream building in his throat, a primal sound of horror and betrayal. He had to tell someone. The police, the FBI. But what if they were already compromised? What if Richter's Project Paperclip connection ran deeper than just his past? What if Miriam and Ben knew more than they let on? The wink at the black sedan flashed in his mind. He reached for the journal, his fingers still numb with shock, needing to secure it, to protect this horrifying truth. But as his hand brushed against the aged leather, a faint, almost imperceptible click echoed from the front door of his own house. A sound that shouldn't have been there. A sound that meant someone was entering. The faint click from his own front door wasn't just a sound. It was a detonation in the suffocating silence of his study. Leo froze, every nerve ending screaming. Someone was inside his house. His house. He hadn't heard a car, hadn't seen any movement on the quiet street. The precision, the stealth, sent a chill that seeped into his bones. His eyes darted from the journal, that vile, damning artifact, to the door of his study, then back to the window, offering no escape. Panic, cold and sharp, clawed at his throat. He had to hide it. Now, scrambling, he swept a pile of academic papers from his desk drawer, stuffing the leather-bound horror beneath them, then shoving the drawer shut with a desperate thud that echoed far too loudly in the sudden stillness of his home. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat of terror. He pressed his back against the wall, listening. Nothing. No footsteps, no voice. Just the heavy, silent presence of an intruder. The black sedan. Miriam and Ben's knowing looks. This wasn't a random break-in. This was connected. He was connected. Klaus Richter. A primal fight-or-flight instinct warred within him. Run. Call for help. But where? Who could he trust? The police? The FBI? What if the network Richter was part of stretched further than he could possibly imagine? What if calling them just alerted them? Then another, more dangerous thought solidified. He wouldn't run. He wouldn't hide. He needed answers not just from the pages of a journal, but from the man himself. From the monster who had charmed his way into Leo's life. He had to face him, to look into the eyes of the man who penned those chilling words. With a desperate surge of adrenaline, Leo snatched his phone, activated the voice recorder, and shoved it deep into his pocket. If this was his last act, it would be to expose the truth. He crept out of his study, heart in his mouth, scanning the silent house. The front door was now firmly shut, no sign of forced entry. Whoever had been there was gone or hiding. The message was clear, we know. He slipped out of his own house, leaving the violation behind, and walked the familiar short distance to Richter's, each step feeling like an act of rebellion. The rose garden glowed faintly in the encroaching twilight, an ironic beacon of beauty against the darkness churning in Leo's soul. He found Richter in his study, as always a half-finished chess game on the table, a classical concerto playing softly, the very image of cultured serenity. "Leo, my boy, a pleasure." Richter's smile was warm, unburdened. It was a mask, Leo now knew, a perfectly crafted illusion. Leo's hands were clammy, but he forced himself to meet Richter's gaze, to project an air of calm that was utterly alien to his inner turmoil. "Dr. Richter," he began, his voice surprisingly steady, "I've been wrestling with a philosophical question, something profound." Richter inclined his head, a flicker of intrigued amusement in his eyes. "Ah, philosophy, the quest for meaning in a chaotic world. Tell me, what great enigma troubles you tonight?" Leo walked slowly towards the window, his back to Richter for a moment, gathering his courage. "It's about the nature of man, and evil. Can a person commit acts of profound, unforgivable cruelty, participate in unspeakable horrors, things that defy every measure of human decency and still, in their own mind, believe they are good, or even retain some fragment of goodness?" He turned, his gaze now locked on Richter, searching for any tell, any crack in the placid facade. Richter didn't flinch. His eyes, though, seemed to deepen, to hold a weight of ancient understanding. He paused, picking up a white knight from the chessboard, turning it slowly in his fingers. "A fascinating question, Leo, a truly profound one. It speaks to the darkest corners of human experience." His voice was calm, almost soothing, a stark contrast to the earthquake raging inside Leo. "Imagine, if you will, a time of absolute fracture, when the world itself seemed to rip apart at the seams, when ideologies became bloodthirsty gods, demanding unquestioning fealty, when the very concept of individual morality was subsumed by the crushing will of the state." He set the knight down, meeting Leo's gaze directly. "In such a time, survival ceases to be a right and becomes a desperate, daily struggle. And sometimes to survive, one is forced to make choices that, in retrospect, seem indefensible. Choices between evils, not between good and evil. To protect one's own, perhaps, or simply to exist for another day." Leo listened, a cold dread uncoiling in his stomach. Richter's hypothetical was an intricate dance, a performance of carefully chosen words. "But there is another element," Richter continued, his voice dropping to a low, almost confessional tone. "The pursuit of knowledge. The belief, perhaps arrogant, perhaps delusional, that one's work, one's mind, could still serve a higher purpose. To advance humanity, to unlock secrets that would ultimately benefit future generations. Even if the immediate tools, the immediate methods were regrettable. Even if the human cost was deemed acceptable by those in power." He leaned forward slightly, his gaze unwavering. "I have seen, Leo, the absolute devaluation of human life. I have witnessed the machinery of annihilation, designed with a chilling efficiency. The screams, the deprivation, the transformation of living beings into mere data points. And in such a crucible, One finds oneself in rooms where decisions are made. Decisions that determine who lives, who dies, who becomes a statistic. One can be an unwilling participant, a cog in a horrific machine, believing that by remaining within it, by appearing to cooperate, one might, in some small way, mitigate the suffering. Or perhaps, secure a future for knowledge that would otherwise be lost. Richter paused, allowing his words to hang heavy in the air, laden with a chilling, detached rationale. Is that good, Leo? To choose the lesser evil? To sacrifice the present for a theoretical, perhaps illusory future good? To compromise one's soul for a science one believes will ultimately save lives, even as it takes them? The world labels such men monsters, but in their own minds often they are merely survivors. Scientists, men who believed they were doing what was necessary for the greater arc of progress. The air in the study thickened, suffocating Leo. He had expected bluster, denial, perhaps even anger. Not this chillingly calm, almost sympathetic justification. Richter painted himself not as a perpetrator, but as a reluctant, tortured observer, forced into complicity, driven by the impossible choices of survival and a twisted sense of scientific duty. The monster was blurring, dissolving into a man who saw himself as a tragic figure, a necessary evil, perhaps even a hero in his own right. The sheer audacity of it, the horrifying self-deception, was breathtaking. So, you believe, Leo began, his voice hoarse, that the pursuit of science, the advancement of knowledge, can justify any means? Richter smiled, a faint, almost mournful expression. Justify, Leo? No, but perhaps explain, mitigate, or, in the eyes of history, eventually redeem. Time has a way of softening the edges of horror, doesn't it? Especially when the discoveries born from it prove beneficial. Tell me, Mr. Thorne, if a cure for a terrible disease were discovered through unethical means, would you refuse it? Would humanity, or would the ends ultimately reshape the perception of the means? He leaned back, his eyes piercing Leo's. The lines are rarely clean, Leo, rarely good or evil. Most often they are simply necessary, and sometimes necessity is a cruel master. But tell me, my young friend, what would you have done? In the eye of that storm, with everything you held dear at stake, what impossible choice would you have made? The question hung, a silent accusation, turning the tables on Leo, as he grappled with Richter's chilling logic, with the profound, unsettling moral dilemma that twisted his stomach. The soft strains of the concerto abruptly faded, replaced by the jarring, insistent ring of the doorbell. The sound echoed through the house, shattering the fragile peace, and Richter's eyes, still locked on Leo's, widened just perceptibly, a subtle shift in his otherwise impenetrable facade. The insistent summons from the doorbell ripped through the air, a blunt, mechanical intrusion that severed the thread of their unsettling discourse. Richter's eyes, moments before blazing with a chilling conviction, narrowed fractionally, the subtle shift a telltale sign of a predator sensing its own hunt. Leo, still reeling from the moral whiplash of Richter's unapologetic pragmatism, found himself suddenly alert, every nerve-ending tingling with an unspoken premonition. Richter rose, his movements deliberate, betraying none of the internal turmoil Leo knew must be simmering beneath the surface. "Pardon me," he murmured, his voice regaining its usual composed cadencel. He walked to the imposing front door, and Leo, drawn by an invisible current, followed him to the edge of the living room, concealed by the rich velvet of the drapes. He watched as Richter peered through the peephole, a fleeting shadow crossing his face before he straightened his posture and unlatched the heavy bolts. On the porch stood a man in a crisp, if somewhat generic, utility uniform. He was of medium height, with a neatly trimmed beard and eyes that seemed to constantly scan his surroundings. A clipboard was tucked under his arm, and a toolbox rested at his feet. "Good afternoon, sir," the man said, his voice smooth, almost too genial. "Ben Carter, from the city's electrical department. We're conducting a routine inspection of the grid in this neighborhood. Had a few minor fluctuations reported. Just need to check your main fuse box and perhaps the wiring in your study, if you don't mind. Standard procedure." Richter's gaze lingered on Ben Carter's hands, then swept over the man's uniform, settling for a beat too long on the city logo stitched onto his breast pocket. "Indeed," Richter said, his tone flat. "A sudden surge of civic duty, wouldn't you say? I wasn't aware of any reports." "Just being proactive, sir," Ben replied, a practiced smile plastered to his face. He gestured vaguely down the street. Bit of a nuisance, I know. Won't take long. Richter hesitated, his eyes flicking towards Leo's hidden position, a silent signal almost imperceptible. Then, with a curt nod, he stepped aside. Very well. Mind the Persian rugs. Ben entered, his eyes darting across the opulent entryway, taking in the antique furniture and the art. Leo, from his vantage point, scrutinized the inspector. There was a professionalism about him, an almost clinical efficiency that felt out of place for a casual utility worker. His movements were too precise, his gaze too sharp. He wasn't just looking at the house, he was assessing it. The main box is in the basement, Richter stated, leading the way. But you mentioned the study? Ah, yes, Ben said, following Richter down the hall. Sometimes faulty wiring can impact sensitive equipment like computers or, well, anything that draws a substantial current. Just a quick check for frayed insulation, loose connections. He paused, looking into the large, book-lined study. Looks like you have quite the setup in there. It serves its purpose, Richter replied, his voice devoid of warmth. He gestured towards a corner of the room. The main circuit for this wing runs through that wall panel, behind the bookshelf. Ben nodded, placing his toolbox on the floor with a soft thud. He slid open the panel, revealing a tangle of wires and conduits. Richter stood a few feet away, arms crossed, watching every move. Ben pulled out a small device, a multimeter, and began to prod at the wires. His back was mostly turned to Richter, but Leo noticed the subtle tension in Richter's shoulders, the way his head was tilted just so, listening. Ben worked quickly, his fingers deft. He adjusted a dial on his meter, grunted, and then, with a seemingly casual movement, his left hand dipped into his toolbox. Leo's breath hitched. In the periphery of his vision, Ben's right hand was still engaged with the wires, ostensibly checking for voltage, but his left hand was doing something else entirely. It slid out of the toolbox, holding something small and dark, almost imperceptible against the shadows of the wiring. This is it, Leo thought, a cold wave washing over him. They're making their move. As Ben's hand moved to place the device, a barely audible click echoed from somewhere deeper within the wall. Ben froze. His left hand retracted instantly, empty. He straightened up, a frown on his face. Everything all right? Richter asked, his voice deceptively mild. Ben sighed, shaking his head. Seems there's a microcurrent surge protector on this particular circuit, sir. Custom job by the looks of it. Very sensitive. Tripped just as I was testing. He forced a chuckle. Good thing, too. Saved your equipment, I suppose. It'll reset itself in a moment. He deftly closed the panel, securing it. No real issues, though. Looks shipshape, all things considered. Just a particularly vigilant system you have. Richter merely inclined his head. I prefer precision, Mr. Carter. In all things. The unspoken message hung heavy in the air. Ben's smile faltered for a second. A flicker of something almost like grudging respect, or perhaps frustration, in his eyes. He gathered his tools, offered a polite but curt farewell, and exited the house. As the door clicked shut, the silence that descended upon the foyer was heavier, more oppressive than before. Leo emerged from the drapes, his gaze locking with Richter's. The old man's face was unreadable, but his eyes were alight with a dangerous, calculating glint. He seemed quite thorough, Leo ventured, choosing his words carefully. Almost too thorough for a routine check, wouldn't you say? He paused, searching for the right phrasing, a way to convey his growing alarm without exposing his own forbidden knowledge. I've had a peculiar feeling lately, Professor, as if there are eyes on this house, strangers watching, a sense of trouble brewing on the horizon. Richter's gaze sharpened, piercing through Leo. The usual veil of intellectual detachment lifted, revealing a stark, raw vulnerability that shocked Leo to his core. For the first time, Richter looked utterly human, burdened by an inescapable past. Trouble, Leo? Richter's voice was a low rumble, barely above a whisper. A storm, I would say, long foretold, finally making landfall. He stepped closer, his hand reaching out, not quite touching Leo's arm, but conveying an urgency that vibrated in the air between them. You see it, don't you? The ripples in the water, even when the surface seems calm. He searched Leo's eyes, a profound, terrifying trust dawning in his own. Yes, Leo. They are here. And they are hunting. He turned abruptly, walking towards the study. Leo followed, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. Richter went straight to the large, ornate globe in the corner of the room. With a precise, almost imperceptible movement, he pressed a specific point on the Tropic of Capricorn. The globe rotated with a soft whirring sound, not on its usual axis, but to the side, revealing a small, recessed panel behind it. Inside was a keypad, an old-fashioned rotary phone, and a small, leather-bound notebook. "This," Richter said, his voice low and urgent, "is my fail-safe. Should the house become compromised, there is a passage accessed through the hearth in the sitting room. It leads to the old tunnel system beneath the city, connecting to the cellar of the abandoned brewery on Elm Street. Always go north when you reach the main junction. You can exit there and disappear into the crowd. I've stocked it with essentials: water, dried food, a change of clothes. You have a key hidden beneath the second loose brick on the right of the fireplace, behind the brass poker stand." Leo stared, speechless, his mind struggling to process the implications. An escape tunnel? Hidden within this seemingly ordinary suburban home? "The phone," Richter continued, gesturing to the rotary device, "is a direct, encrypted line to one contact. He will know what to do." The notebook contains a series of coded messages. Each entry corresponds to a specific threat level or action required. Memorize the first 5. The phrase, "The nightingale sings a bitter song," means they have breached the outer perimeter. "The roses are wilted," means they are inside the house. If you hear me say or are told, "The maestro has left the stage," it means I have been incapacitated and you must initiate Protocol Alpha. You will then relay message 7 from the notebook to the contact. Understood. Richter's eyes, usually so guarded, now held in raw intensity, a desperate plea. "Leo, I am trusting you with this. With my life, and perhaps with something far greater than my life. You saw the game begin today. Now you are in it." He closed the panel with a soft click, the globe rotating back into place, leaving no trace of the hidden mechanism. The room, once a sanctuary of intellectual debate, now felt like a war room, every shadow a potential enemy, every sound a harbinger of doom. Leo stood frozen, the weight of Richter's trust, the chilling reality of the unfolding hunt, settling heavy on his shoulders. He was no longer just an apprentice. He was an accomplice, and the game had only just begun. The air in the study, once thick with the scent of aged paper and leather, now reeked of fear and a bitter, metallic tang Leo couldn't quite place. He stood rigid, the echo of Richter's commands reverberating in his skull, the gravity of his new role pressing down with suffocating weight. Accomplice. The word was a branding iron, searing itself onto his identity. Richter was right. The game had begun. "Leo," Richter's voice cut through his internal turmoil. The older man was now at his desk, sifting through a stack of technical drawings. "I need you to organize these for me. They're old schematics, but their order is peculiar. Start with the ones marked Project Kronos in the mahogany box on the lower shelf." Richter didn't wait for a response, his attention already consumed by the blueprints in his hands. Leo, still slightly numb, moved on autopilot. The mahogany box was heavy, adorned with intricate brass inlays. He pulled it down, the wood creaking softly in protest. Inside, a jumble of rolled-up parchments and brittle, yellow diagrams lay nested among what looked like defunct electronic components. As he carefully extracted the first roll, his fingers brushed against something solid and out of place beneath the felt lining. A false bottom. His heart hammered against his ribs. This wasn't part of Richter's instructions. A primal curiosity, mixed with the paranoia Richter had so effectively instilled, urged him on. He prized the false bottom open with a fingernail, revealing a shallow compartment. Tucked within was a single, leather-bound volume, smaller than a standard journal, its cover starkly plain, save for a single, starkly debossed German word: Menschheit. Humanity. A shiver traced its way down Leo's spine. He glanced at Richter, whose back was still to him, hunched over his desk. Leo's hands trembled slightly as he opened the book. It wasn't a diary in the traditional sense, but a meticulous log, filled with densely packed, precise handwriting, interspersed with technical diagrams and chillingly dispassionate observations. The entries dated back decades, beginning just after the war. The initial pages were unsettling enough, detailing theories of neurological manipulation and behavioral conditioning, framed as studies in social cohesion and rehabilitation. Then, Leo's eyes snagged on a diagram, crudely sketched but undeniably a human brain, festooned with electrodes and wires leading to an apparatus described as a psychosensory modulator. Below it, an entry from 1953. Phase 2, Subject 7, female, adult, severe cognitive regression observed post-exposure to neural resonant frequencies. Data indicates sustained sensory deprivation at 0.7 to 1.2 Hz induces heightened susceptibility to memory implantation. Success rate, 43%. Further refinement needed. Hypothesis: increased neuroplasticity correlates with developmental stage. Leo's breath hitched. He flipped through more pages, his fingers growing cold. The clinical language was a shield for horrors. And then he saw it. An entire section titled Project Nightingale, Pediatric Applications, Observing Heightened Neuroplasticity in Prepubescent Subjects for Accelerated Data Acquisition Regarding Pain Thresholds and Memory Implantation Resistance. The words blurred, but the implications sharpened into agonizing clarity. Children. Richter hadn't just participated in unspeakable experiments. He had designed them. The schematics showed miniature versions of the psychosensory modulator, explicitly adapted for juvenile cranial structures. There were references to stressor stimuli and adaptive responses in developing organisms, all meticulously documented, devoid of any empathy. One entry, dated 1957, read, Subject P12, male, age 8, application of pulsed neuroresonant field for memory erasure protocol successful beyond predicted parameters. Subject now displays complete amnesia of pre-exposure trauma. Data confirms superior neural malleability in young subjects. My design for the cortical suppression matrix has proven highly effective. Ethical concerns noted, but outweighed by invaluable data acquisition. Progress demands sacrifice. Leo felt a wave of nausea, cold sweat prickling his skin. The force to choose narrative Richter had so carefully woven around himself, the subtle plea for understanding. It shattered into 1,000 shards of monstrous deceit. Richter wasn't a man forced into a corner. He was an architect of suffering, a calculating monster who viewed human beings, even children, as raw material for his horrific advancements. The intellectual kinship Leo had felt, the glimmer of respect, curdled into abject disgust. He wanted to throw the book across the room, to scream. Something troubling you, Leo? Richter's voice, calm and even, cut through the silence. Leo flinched, snapping the journal shut and hiding it clumsily behind the mahogany box. Richter turned, his gaze unsettlingly sharp, resting on Leo's pale face. He hadn't seen the book, Leo hoped, but he had certainly seen Leo's reaction. Richter walked slowly towards him, his eyes, usually so distant, now held an unreadable depth. You look as though you've seen a ghost, my boy. He stopped just a foot away, his presence suddenly overwhelming. The weight of knowledge, isn't it? Can be a terrible burden. A lonely one. He reached out, not quite touching Leo, but hovering, a strange, almost paternal gesture that made Leo's skin crawl. I often wished I had someone who understood the true cost of progress. The isolation of being the one to ask the questions no one else dares, to push the boundaries of what is acceptable, for the greater good. His voice softened, tinged with a profound, aching loneliness. Most people see only the immediate cost, Leo. They lack the vision for the future, the understanding that some seeds must be planted in blood for the harvest to save millions. Richter's gaze locked onto Leo's, an almost desperate plea in their depths. You, Leo, you have that spark, that rare intellect that can truly grasp the complexities, the necessities. You are the closest I have ever come to finding an heir, a mind capable of carrying on the legacy, of understanding that sometimes one must choose the unthinkable to prevent a greater catastrophe. He paused, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. I saw it in you the first time you questioned my axioms. You see beyond the surface, beyond the sentimental to the underlying mechanics. You are my last chance at redemption. To ensure my life's work, however controversial, serves its ultimate purpose. His eyes, full of a twisted affection, seemed to pierce through Leo, seeking not just understanding, but complicity. Leo stood frozen, the journal's unspeakable truths burning in his mind, Richter's words of twisted mentorship swirling around him. A monster, yes, but a monster who had offered him genuine intellectual kinship, who saw him as more than just a student. And Leo was still bound by the protocol, by the chilling reality that he was now an accomplice tasked with protecting this man. Suddenly, a dull thud echoed from the floor above, followed by a faint scrape against the ceiling. Richter's head snapped up, his eyes narrowing. The paternal facade vanished, replaced by an instant, calculating alertness. "The nightingale sings a bitter song," he whispered, his voice dangerously low. "They're here." The dull thud from above vibrated through the floorboards, a tremor that barely registered but for Richter's chilling stillness. His eyes, seconds ago filled with a predatory warmth for Leo, hardened into chips of obsidian. "The nightingale sings a bitter song," he repeated, the words a low, guttural growl that stripped away every layer of his cultivated facade. "They're here." He moved with an unnerving economy of motion, not towards a weapon, but towards a hidden compartment behind a rotating bookshelf. Leo watched, mesmerized and horrified, as the intellectual mentor morphed into something ancient, dangerous. Richter's fingers, surprisingly agile, extracted a small, intricately machined cylinder, no larger than his thumb, crafted from a dull, dark alloy. It hummed faintly, a latent energy contained within its sleek form. "My contingency," Richter said, turning back to Leo, his gaze now sharp, appraising. "I have known, for weeks, that this moment was inevitable. A man of my profile does not live unnoticed for long. They have been closing in, like vultures scenting carrion." He extended the cylinder, its weight feeling immense despite its size. "This is a frequency modulator. It is designed to interfere with certain tracking systems, creating a localized blind spot for a critical few minutes. It also contains a short-range, non-lethal sonic pulse emitter, enough to disorient, to scatter a crowd, to buy time." Leo stared at the device, then back at Richter's unblinking eyes. "You want me to install this?" The question was barely a whisper. The journal's horrors flashed through his mind, the calculations, the human cost, the casual depravity. This device was not a benign scientific curiosity. It was a tool of escape, a testament to a mind that constantly plotted survival, regardless of the blood on its hands. "Precisely," Richter affirmed, his voice resonating with an unshakable conviction. "The demonstration rocket, my latest triumph, is merely a decoy, Leo, a spectacle to draw attention, to create the perfect smokescreen. The real project is elsewhere. This component, however, is crucial for both my escape and the smooth operation of its diversionary tactics. There's a specific slot, just beneath the primary guidance array. Only someone with your keen eye, your understanding of my designs, can integrate it perfectly without triggering the primary diagnostics." He paused, his gaze boring into Leo's soul. "Place it, Leo, and you ensure my ability to continue my work, to pursue the greater good, unhindered. Withhold it, and you condemn me to whatever twisted justice they believe they serve. And you condemn my life's mission to oblivion." The weight of the cylinder in Leo's palm was unbearable. It hummed, a tiny, malevolent whisper against his skin. This wasn't merely a mechanical task. It was a pact with the devil. He, Leo, a young man who had only sought knowledge, was being asked to actively facilitate the escape of a monster responsible for untold suffering. The intellectual kinship Richter had offered, the twisted praise, now felt like a chain dragging him deeper into the abyss. His hands trembled, not with fear, but with a profound moral revulsion. Miles away, the festive chaos of the annual Summer Blossom Fair pulsed with an almost unbearable vibrancy. Laughter, the saccharine scent of caramel apples, the shrill cries of children on tilt-a-whirls, all mingled beneath a sky painted in the deepening hues of twilight. For Miriam and Ben, it was a cacophony, a garish backdrop to their grim purpose. They sat in their rented sedan, parked discreetly amidst a sea of minivans and SUVs. Miriam adjusted the comms earpiece, the miniature microphone pressed against her cheek. "Status?" she murmured, her voice tight, barely audible above the distant fairground music. "Teams are in position," Ben replied, his eyes scanning the ingress and egress points of the main demonstration area. Snipers on the pavilion rooftops, spotters disguised as fair vendors. Perimeter secure. His fingers drummed a quiet rhythm on the steering wheel, a nervous tick Miriam knew well. He really picked a hell of a place for his last stand, didn't he? A regular family outing. Miriam didn't respond, her gaze fixed on the makeshift stage at the center of the fairground, where a gleaming, polished rocket, absurdly out of place, stood sentinel. It was a replica of Richter's early V2 designs, a symbol of his horrific legacy, now dressed up for public consumption. She remembered the photo in the dossier, the smirking face of a young Richter beside a rudimentary launch pad, smoke billowing, shadows stretching. A shadow that had stretched for decades, finally reaching for her. "The window is tight," she stated, her voice devoid of emotion, a professional mask firmly in place. He'll be on stage, presenting his vision, surrounded by the very people he would have annihilated without a second thought. The moment he approaches the launch mechanism for the demonstration, that's our cue. Synchronized strike. No collateral. No hesitation. Ben nodded, the solemnity of the task etched on his face. "We're ready, Miriam. For Hannah. For all of them." He glanced at her, sensing the immense emotional weight she carried. "You okay?" Miriam's jaw tightened. She ran a thumb over the polished metal of the small, silent pistol holstered at her hip, a weight that mirrored the cylinder in Leo's hand. "I'm fine," she lied, the word a brittle shard of glass. Every fiber of her being screamed for justice, for an end to the haunting specter of men like Richter. Yet, the thought of what they were about to unleash, the potential for chaos in this innocent setting, was a bitter pill. But Richter had chosen this arena. He had invited the reckoning. Alpha 2 confirms target approaching the stage. A voice crackled through their earpieces. Miriam gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white. The fair lights seemed to blur. The music receded into a distant thrum. The world narrowed to the stage, the rocket, and the man who embodied a generational nightmare. Back in Richter's hidden laboratory, the humming cylinder seemed to pulse in Leo's hand, a tiny heart of evil. Richter watched him, a faint, expectant smile playing on his lips. "The choice, Leo," he prompted softly, his voice a silken trap. "Yours to make, aiding me, or allowing them to extinguish the last vestige of true scientific advancement. Choose wisely." The words echoed in Leo's mind, competing with the images from the journal, the cries of nameless victims, the faces of those Miriam sought to avenge. He was caught between a monster's twisted mentorship and the devastating truth of his crimes. The air grew thick, suffocating. Through the distant, muffled walls, he could hear the faint, escalating clamor of the fair, the expectant buzz of the crowd awaiting a spectacle. Richter's clock was ticking. Miriam's clock was ticking. And Leo, the reluctant accomplice, held the key to the next chapter of this terrible, intergenerational war. His fingers, still trembling, began to lift the device. The summer fair of Havenwood shimmered under the dying sun, a kaleidoscope of primary colors and saccharine delights. The air, thick with the scent of popcorn and spun sugar, buzzed with the innocent joy of children and the lazy laughter of adults. A colossal Ferris wheel, a skeletal sentinel against the darkening sky, ferried squealing passengers into the heavens, their small worlds contained within the illuminated cage. But for Miriam, the festive clamor was a discordant symphony, a sickening counterpoint to the dread hammering in her chest. "He's on stage," Ben's voice, tight with controlled urgency, crackled in her ear. "Countdown starting for the demonstration in 5 minutes." Miriam gripped the steering wheel of the rented delivery van, its anonymous shell her shield for now. Through the windshield, beyond the throng, the town square pulsed with an electric anticipation. There it stood, the gleaming, streamlined rocket, a testament to scientific prowess, dwarfing the temporary stage. And beside it, bathed in the glow of spotlights, Dr. Klaus Richter. He looked every inch the benevolent genius, a silver-haired titan radiating charisma, his smile a practiced mask of warmth as he addressed the adoring crowd. "He's enjoying this," Miriam snarled, her breath fogging the glass. "The monster." "Stay focused," Ben cautioned, already slipping out of the passenger side, a utility vest over his nondescript shirt. "We create the diversion. You get to him." They had rehearsed this a dozen times, yet the reality of it felt raw, visceral. Ben melted into the crowd, a ghost among the revelers. Miriam steered the van, slowly, deliberately, towards a service entrance at the rear of the launch area. The gate was manned by a single, bored-looking security guard, easily distracted by Ben's expertly orchestrated malfunction of a nearby generator. The sudden sputter and flicker of lights, a minor inconvenience amidst the fun, created just enough chaos. Miriam was out of the van the moment it stopped, moving with a predator's grace. She moved through the thinning crowd near the perimeter, her eyes locked on Richter, her heart a drumbeat of righteous fury. The names of her family, echoing in the journal, carved into her soul, fueled every step. Meanwhile, in the makeshift, soundproofed laboratory beneath the fairgrounds, Leo's world had been reduced to the humming cylinder in his hand, a tiny, ominous heart. Richter, his back to the wall of monitors displaying the festive square above, watched him, his gaze intense, almost paternal. "The choice, Leo." Richter's voice was a silken snare, cutting through the muffled sounds of the fair. "Yours to make, aiding me, or allowing them to extinguish the last vestige of true scientific advancement. Choose wisely." The words tangled in Leo's mind, a suffocating knot of conflicting loyalties. He could hear it now, faintly, through the thick walls, a sudden surge in the crowd's roar, then a distinct, piercing shriek. A woman's voice, and he knew, Miriam. He stumbled out of the lab, clutching the component, his breath catching in his throat. Up the service stairs, pushing through the back entrances, the sound grew clearer, sharper. The festive atmosphere had fractured. On stage, Richter had just begun his countdown. T-minus 60 seconds to launch, he boomed, his voice amplified, reverberating across the square. But a new sound sliced through the air, raw and untrained, yet piercing in its intensity. Klaus Richter, the name, shouted with venomous clarity, ripped through the jubilant hum, silencing a pocket of the crowd. All eyes turned. Miriam stood at the edge of the stage, her usually composed features distorted by a grief-stricken fury. Her hair was wild, her eyes blazing. "You remember that name, don't you? Miriam Adler. My mother was Helga Adler. My father, Joseph Adler. My grandparents, Alara and Victor Adler." Each name was a hammer blow, tearing through Richter's carefully constructed facade. "You murdered them. You experimented on them. You stole their lives for your monstrous ambitions." The crowd murmured, confused, then indignant. A few security personnel started moving towards Miriam, but she was unstoppable, her voice rising to a wail that silenced even the children. Richter's smile faltered. His eyes, usually so cold and calculating, betrayed a flicker of something close to fear. He lifted a hand, a practiced gesture to calm the crowd, but his eyes darted to a small, concealed button on the podium. "She's delusional," Richter roared, his voice regaining its command. A disturbed individual attempting to disrupt a peaceful demonstration, but his words lacked conviction, his gaze now fixed on the countdown timer, flashing red, 30 seconds. It was then that Leo burst onto the scene, emerging from the shadows of a food truck, the humming cylinder still clenched in his hand. The chaotic tableau froze him. Miriam, a figure of tragic wrath. Richter, exposed, cornered, his benevolence shattered, and the rocket looming, its purpose now chillingly clear. Richter saw him, his eyes, wide with a desperate plea and a silent, terrible command, locked onto Leo's. "Leo, now!" he hissed, his voice just loud enough to carry over the renewed murmuring of the crowd. He gestured frantically with his chin towards the component. Leo, still frozen, was directly in his escape path, the last piece of the puzzle. 15 seconds. The world narrowed to this impossible moment. Miriam's accusations, the echoes of Richter's journal, screamed in one ear. Richter's silent plea, the betrayal of their bond, the lure of scientific advancement, whispered in the other. He saw Richter's hand, hovering over the hidden button, ready to unleash the EMP. He knew what it meant. A blackout, chaos, Richter's escape, and his own complicity. Leo's gaze flickered from Richter's desperate eyes to the small, humming cylinder in his hand. It felt impossibly heavy, a burden of impossible choices. He looked at Miriam, her face stained with tears and fury, and saw the faces of the nameless victims from the journal. He looked at Richter, the man who had opened his mind, now revealed as a monstrous butcher. 5 seconds. "Leo, don't you dare!" Miriam screamed, her eyes finding him, her voice filled with a sudden, dawning horror. Richter, seeing Leo's hesitation, his hand slammed down on the hidden button. A dull click, almost imperceptible. 3 seconds. Leo felt a surge of adrenaline, a cold clarity. His mind raced, processing probabilities, consequences. Give Richter the component, condemn the world to more of his atrocities. Or refuse, ensure Richter's capture or death, but betray the man who had awakened him? 1 second. He made his choice, his arm whipped back, muscle straining. A shot rang out, impossibly loud over the final countdown. The EMP detonated. In an instant, the world went dark. The Ferris wheel lights died, plunging the highest riders into shadow. The stage lights exploded, then flickered out. The amplification system shrieked once, then fell silent. Phones in 1,000 pockets died. The music ceased, the game sputtered. The festive chaos gave way to an unnatural, terrifying silence, broken only by the crackle of expiring electronics. Then the screams began. And through the sudden, suffocating darkness, the fate of Dr. Klaus Richter hung suspended, decided by a boy's last-second, desperate action. The component, mid-air, a silent witness to the reckoning, was now falling. The world shattered not with a bang, but with a terrifying, absolute silence. One moment, the cacophony of the carnival, the pulsing music, the joyous screams, the throbbing lights. The next, a profound, suffocating void. The EMP ripped through the air, a silent, invisible wave of destruction, extinguishing every flicker of light, every whir of machinery, every digital heartbeat. The Ferris wheel, caught at its apex, froze, its passengers suspended in blackness. The stage lights exploded with a final, dying gasp of sparks before surrendering to the void. The music died mid-note, a cruel mockery of festive spirit. Leo stumbled, the reverberation of the shot that had preceded the EMP still ringing in his ears, a ghost echo in the newfound silence. He barely registered the component, now fallen uselessly to the ground between them, a forgotten pebble. He felt Miriam's desperate lunge in the darkness, heard her choked cry, "Richter! No!" But Richter was gone. In that instant of absolute darkness, chaos erupted. The initial shock gave way to 1,000 confused, then terrified screams. Panic, like a fast-spreading contagion, rippled through the crowd. Children cried, parents bellowed names, bodies collided in the blind crush. Leo, caught in the surge, was knocked to his knees. He tasted dust and fear. Through the maelstrom, he dimly saw Miriam and Ben, their forms indistinct blurs against the less absolute black of the night sky, their flashlights now useless. Ben barked orders into a dead radio. Miriam, her face a mask of fury and despair, grabbed Leo's arm, her fingers digging in like talons. "What did you do, Leo? What did you do?" she hissed, her voice raw with accusation, but her eyes scanned the darkness, desperate. Richter, the target, the monster, had vanished like smoke. Leo had thrown the component not to Richter but at the agent, Ben, hoping to buy a split second of confusion, a momentary reprieve. He hadn't known what he intended beyond that, to stop the immediate threat, to save the man who had taught him to see beyond the ordinary, even if that man was a devil. Miriam, seeing the movement, had fired. The shot, he realized now, had been aimed at Richter, but in the chaos of his throw and the EMP's detonation, it had likely gone wide, or simply dissolved into the overwhelming sensory void. Richter, a creature of meticulous planning, must have used the split second of darkness and disarray as his perfectly timed exit. He was prepared. Flashlights, real flashlights, the kind powered by actual batteries, began to pierce the gloom, bobbing like nervous fireflies. Sirens wailed, growing louder, their mechanical voices a jarring contrast to the silence that had preceded them. Emergency lights, powered by backup generators, flickered to life on distant streets, painting the chaos in a grotesque, pulsing crimson. Within minutes, the carnival grounds were swarming with local law enforcement, then federal agents, then men in suits and earpieces who moved with an air of cold authority. The official narrative was spun before the last of the confused carnival goers had even been herded out. A massive, unprecedented electrical surge, A freak accident, nothing to worry about. But the whispers began immediately. Why were so many unmarked cars here? Why did the federal men look so grim? And why had Dr. Richter, their benevolent, genius neighbor, vanished without a trace? Miriam found him hours later, huddled in the makeshift command center set up in the town hall. Her face was streaked with grime, her eyes hollow, but a steely resolve had replaced her earlier despair. Ben stood silently beside her, his jaw tight. "He's gone, Leo," Miriam said, her voice devoid of emotion. Richter vanished. Clean. No trace. She paused, her gaze piercing. "We recovered the component. It was designed to trigger a localized EMP burst, exactly as it did. But it also had a secondary function. A signal beacon. He used it to create the chaos and then to call for extraction." Leo felt a cold dread settle in his stomach. He hadn't saved Richter. He'd helped him. His impulsive, desperate action had played right into the monster's meticulous plan. He was a pawn, or worse, an accomplice. "The shot," Leo began, his voice barely a whisper. Miriam's expression hardened. "The shot was mine, Leo, aimed at Richter. You threw something, I reacted, and then the EMP hit. In that fraction of a second, he was gone. But you, Leo," she stepped closer, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "You hesitated. You intervened. And because of you, a man responsible for unimaginable horrors, a man who should have faced justice, is free. Don't think for a second we don't know that." Ben placed a hand on Miriam's shoulder. "We're leaving, Leo," he said, his voice flat. "Our mission failed. Or rather, it was compromised. We'll be back one day. Richter will be found. But you need to live with this, with the choices you make." They left Willow Creek under the cloak of pre-dawn, their faces grim, their mission a failure, their quarry escaped. The town, once so idyllic, so innocent, was left to grapple with the phantom limbs of its shattered peace. The carnival became a symbol of betrayal, its gaiety replaced by a chilling memory of darkness and deceit. The children of Willow Creek grew up with a heightened suspicion, a quiet understanding that monsters could wear the kindest smiles. Years later, the hum of the clean room was a familiar lullaby to Dr. Leo Maxwell. The precise, methodical work of aligning microscopic thrusters, calibrating quantum entanglement communicators. It was a world away from the chaotic, visceral terror of that night in Willow Creek, yet intrinsically linked. He was a brilliant aerospace engineer, sought after by the world's most innovative minds, a pioneer in propulsion systems that promised to take humanity beyond the stars. But the stars held no solace for the shadows that clung to him. His apartment, Spartan and organized, featured only one personal artifact in his otherwise minimalist office. A meticulously crafted model rocket, suspended from the ceiling by a single monofilament wire. It was a replica, exact in every detail, of a conceptual propulsion system sketch Richter had once shown him, a design so audacious, so far ahead of its time, it could only have sprung from the mind of a twisted genius. Leo often found himself staring at it, the polished aluminum glinting under the soft light. He traced the delicate curves, the innovative nozzle design, the miniature holographic thrusters. He remembered the thrill of Richter's lessons, the expansion of his own mind, the boundless horizons that the old man had opened to him. He remembered the laughter, the gentle encouragement, the shared wonder. And then he remembered the journal, the photographs, the faces of the victims, etched into his memory, a silent, screaming testament to Richter's monstrous capacity. He remembered Miriam's furious tears, Ben's cold determination, and he remembered his own desperate, impulsive act that night, the thrown component, the split-second decision that had allowed the monster to slip away. He had protected him, or had he merely enabled him? Had he saved a man who, despite his past, had awakened his mind, or had he condemned the world to an enduring threat? The line blurred with the passage of time, the choices becoming less about right or wrong, and more about the unbearable weight of human duality. He had seen the best of humanity in Richter's intellect, and the absolute worst in his past. Sometimes, late at night, a chill would run down his spine. Richter had vanished, but the seeds of his evil, the components of his ambition, could still be out there. And Leo, the brilliant engineer who now pushed the boundaries of space travel, lived with the gnawing secret that he had been an unwitting architect of that enduring shadow, forever bound to a choice that defined him, and forever haunted by the echo of the past. The model rocket, suspended in the silent air, was a constant, shimmering reminder that some stars were best left unreached, and some knowledge too terrible to possess.